everybody. All right. Hope you're having a great day today. Today, I brought in a very special guest where the topic of today is unusual secrets to practicing guitar effectively. So, we're going to be talking about what you can do to perhaps practice differently than you are now. And also, brought in a very special guest, someone that I've known many, many, many years, leading authority on guitar practice, like in the world. And we're talking about my good friend, Mike Philippov. Mike, good to have you here, buddy.
Hello, Tom Hess. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
All right, excellent. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, or have you, maybe discuss here, is how to reveal maybe a way of practicing that you do that maybe the average guitar player, the average person doesn't really do. Maybe because they have different goals or objectives or challenges, or maybe they're just at a different level than you, which is very likely, or they've been taught things or they've read things somewhere else that maybe aren't working as well for them as they could be, or the things that you're doing. So maybe if you want to start off with, if you just give us a little bit of your general philosophy or thoughts about practicing and practicing guitar, and then maybe some examples of how you approach practicing. What do you do? I think a lot of people want to know, well, what does Philippov do?
Sure. Yes. So I think we have to start with defining what practicing is, because everything else stems from that, and everything else is going to make a lot more sense as far as what I do and what other people should or shouldn't do. And practicing, coming through my words, is really a way to either solve some problem in your playing or to develop a skill in your playing that you don't yet have that you want to have. And in my case, I am actually way out of balance as far as my practicing goes than the average guitar player should probably be, because I am obviously a guitar teacher. And a lot of my students come to me, they want to solve problems in their playing. And very often, when people want to improve their practicing, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes, it relates to physical playing, technique / speed, or some combination, or undoing bad habits in their playing. Somebody who's been self-taught for 30 years and wants to finally get their technique in shape to make their playing feel easier, that sort of thing. And so my practicing, the skills that I need as far as that I want to get out of practicing, is the ability to help people with those sorts of problems. And for me, that sort of necessitates me to be somewhat more, actually, probably a lot more one-dimensional in my practicing than the average person should be. And we'll talk about what the average person should do in a second. And what I like to do, especially over the last few years, is I have these sets of practicing techniques that I teach to my students to make their playing feel easier, undo bad habits, and build speed, improve their technique, make things easier, and so on. And I like to stress test them by finding things that I personally find challenging to play. Either it's because I can't play it as fast as I want, or I can, but it's not as consistent, meaning I can't play at that speed very consistently, or it's not in time, or some sort of challenge, like I feel more tension in my body when I play it. And I just think, okay, if I had a student in front of me with that exact problem, what would I have that person do? And then I just do it based upon how I would teach that student. And oftentimes I find, especially as I've been teaching for a very long time, I found that some of the techniques I used to teach maybe 10 years ago still are just as valid today as they were 10 years ago. Some apply to certain skill levels that don't really apply once you become more advanced. In fact, it's funny, Tom Hess and I, you and I talked about this topic of focus rotation some years ago. It's a very fundamental technique, very universal technique that I think every guitar player in the world needs to know how to do, which is, to give like a 30-second overview, is where you take, let's say, 5 or 6 things that you need to focus on, like, say, pick attack, string noise control, timing, and tension. That's like 3 things, but whatever. And you play, let's say, a scale up and down, over and over, and you rotate your focus between all these things I just mentioned, making sure you're doing them correctly. So focus rotation. Well, what I found maybe about a year or so ago is I have sort of outgrown the basic idea of focus rotation. When I say I mean any player who reaches a certain level of proficiency and just basic mastery of the general focus rotation kind of needs to go beyond that and needs to know how to do focus rotation instantly. Essentially, when you play a note, you want to be able to do focus rotation like lightning fast, like in a fraction of a second. Scan your entire body for tension, string noise, timing, synchronization, pick attack, get feedback like instantly. And the faster you can do that, the easier it becomes to just improve faster. but you have to earn your way there. It's not just like, okay, you learn what focus rotation is and then you can suddenly do it. So things like that evolve. And what that allows me to do is, of course, when I have students in front of me, I can assess, okay, this guy needs just the basic overview of focus rotation, or this guy is more advanced. Let me give him the more sophisticated version, and it helps me to basically be better at what I do. And the other thing that I find probably the average person will find to be excruciatingly freaking boring, but I find it fun as hell because I have a background in powerlifting. And one of the things with powerlifting is obviously the goal is to lift the most weight that you can under the constraint of ideally staying in a certain weight class that you can. And one of the ways you achieve that without gaining body weight is to focus on certain physical cues in your body. Like when you're setting up for a squat, you got the bar on your back. Believe it or not, it's not as simple as just going up or down, with the body. You can also focus on a whole bunch of hair-splitting details, like exactly how you breathe against the belt, or how do you initiate the movement, by sitting back or by breaking at the knees. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but all these little technical details that can make the same weight on your back feel heavier or lighter. And I'm finding the same thing applies to guitar technique very, very in a very strong way. So when I'm practicing my picking, for example, I experiment with finding little things or little details, like where do you apply more pressure? Do you apply a little bit more pressure by the weight of the arm going through the forearm or through the wrist on the guitar, or exactly how much you angle the pick, like all these little things. And again, the average person finds this completely mind-numbingly boring. All the better for me, actually, because I can do that work, and then I can just tell somebody, hey, hold your pick a little bit more like this, and they're like, wow, this feels a lot easier all of a sudden. Well, that's why I'm here. And so these are the details that I'm focused on. Now, let's talk about the average person. The average person should probably not do 90% of the things I just said, because the average person doesn't have such a specialized problem to solve that I solve. The average person needs to be, I don't want to say well-rounded. Well, I'm going to say the word well-rounded, but I don't mean that in the sense that you got to know how to play like 50 different styles or things like that. That's not what I mean. If you want to be just a good metal player and just play one style, or a good country player or a good jazz player and just be good in that style, there's a whole bunch of different sets of skills that you need beyond just raw technique or beyond just raw music theory or ear training. You need a whole bunch of different verticals that you have to be proficient in, and you have to tie these things obviously together. So when you're let's say improvising or even composing a guitar solo, it's not improvising a solo isn't one thing. It's not one skill. It's a byproduct of tying a whole bunch of things together. Technique is one of them. Knowledge of your fretboard is another one. Your ear training is another one. Your phrasing is another one. Music theory knowledge to know, what are you playing over? What are the chords? What's the key? That's another one. And just like I talked about focus rotation, being able to analyze a whole bunch of things about your playing in a split second, when it comes to improvising, you got to do that across a whole bunch of skills at the same time, which makes it more complicated in that sense. And so the average guitar player doesn't need to go that deep into the weeds of technique as I do, but they would need to become more well-rounded across all the skills that apply to their specific style, and then work on tying them together. But again, it all to bring everything back kind of full circle comes back to, what are the problems that you have in your playing? What are the things you want to do that you can't currently do? And what are the skills that you need to have? And to answer that question, I guess you have to first, meaning to know what you need to practice, you need to answer that question first. What are the skills and what are the problems? And if you don't currently have a good answer to that question, except for maybe, well, I just feel like I suck and I'm not as good as I want to be, you want to have somebody good assess your playing and give you sort of an overview of where you are with the skills that you need to have in relation to that goal, and then kind of go from there. So that's kind of a general answer to that question. Tom Hess, what are your thoughts about on these things? Do you agree, disagree with anything I said?
Yeah, no, I generally agree with what you're saying. I wanted to come back and touch on a couple of things you mentioned in the beginning. When teaching or talking about focus rotation, I find that a lot of people misunderstand what that even means. So sometimes people misunderstand focus rotation to mean, oh, I should practice this lick and then that technique and then this chord. And they think that we're focusing on different things that they should be learning or practicing. What we're really talking about, or what you're referencing, is in focus rotation is a specific thing, one thing. So a particular technique or a lick or a phrase or something, and then rotating what you're focusing on every time that you play and practice that particular item. And I know you said that, and it should be pretty obvious just by the definition, focus rotation, but somehow sometimes people seem to misunderstand what is meant, and then they're off on the wrong track, practicing 5 different items, and they're just rotating the item, the thing they're playing, instead of what they're paying attention to. Something else that you said that I found very interesting is that you said that your practicing is motivated in large part by your desire to always help people at a higher and higher level. So you're like doing the practice, the investigation for the students to try to understand, okay, if I had X problem that this student has, I don't have it, but if I did, what are perhaps the causes that he's going through that are causing this? And what are the various solutions, things that you might take for granted in your own playing because you don't have those problems? Maybe you never had those problems, but we as teachers have to put ourselves in the mind of people who do have those problems, who can't do certain things, who are making errors in how they're approaching things, how they're practicing, what the technique is. And, that's something that teachers do that other players who maybe some of them are really good don't do. They just take for granted, well, I've always done it this way. And they have a hard time teaching others who have problems that they didn't have. So you're kind of going through a simulation process of, okay, if I was a guy who had this set of problems, which I don't have, but if I was him and doing it this way, how to best solve it. And I think that is super useful. And to think about the time, I mean, I want people to appreciate the time and the effort that you put in on a regular basis to become a greater and greater expert in helping people solve their problems, because most people, even most teachers, wouldn't do that. They'd pick up the guitar and they're just playing, they're doing their own thing, right? They're writing their own songs. They're practicing for their own sake, but you're actually practicing for the benefit of the people you're helping. First, it's a very noble thing. And second, I think that people might just either think that all guitar teachers do that. They definitely don't. It's a pretty rare thing. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I wanted people to really hear that and appreciate the effort that you're putting into the things that you do for their benefit. Of course, you're getting paid and you're paid very well for it. But the point is, they're the ultimate beneficiary of all of this effort that's gone into things. The other thing that you mentioned, which I thought was really good for people to focus on or really hear and understand, is that when you're starting out and you're practicing a specific technique or you're trying to solve a specific problem and your mind is focused on different elements at a time, the focus rotation idea, you want to get to the point where you don't have to do, I'm going to focus on tension now. Now I'm going to focus on the picking hand movement. Now I'm going to focus on the synchronization of the two hands. You want to be able to cycle through these things like really fast in real time. You don't want to have to spend 5 minutes focusing on tension. You want to be able to be aware, make adjustments if necessary on the spot, focus on the next thing, be aware, make adjustments if necessary on the spot, correct that, and just go around really quickly. And that's something that happens by going through the motions of the slower paced focus rotation practice first, getting really good at it. And then the better you get at that, the faster you solve future problems because you can go through the process very, very quickly. And it doesn't seem boring, like I'm going to spend, the next 5 minutes focusing on my tension now. So we're not abandoning it. We're just getting so good at it that it goes by really, really quick. And you're kind of, your attention is going through all these different areas very quickly, almost simultaneously. And that's what helps to learn and master things faster than one otherwise would. But perhaps one of the challenges that people have is like, well, this focus rotation stuff seems kind of boring. And no one wants to go through the boring stuff in order to get past this. So once you get really good at it, you never have to do it again. Once you get really good at that process, that focus rotation process, you don't have to go through that boring practice. Everything goes faster. You learn faster. You correct problems faster. You start absorbing things faster. You master things faster. Even things that are new to you, maybe a technique you've not done before. You've gone through that process, that training, and now learning everything else becomes faster, not simply because you're a better player, but because you know how to train yourself when no one else is there.
Yeah, for sure. Those are great comments. And something you said about people not understanding what focus rotation is and trying to think they need a whole bunch of different exercises. I see that all the time. People ask me like, what are the best exercises to improve, whatever skill? And oftentimes the answer is literally anything, because it's, virtually anything, not literally anything, but virtually anything. Like, say, take technique, for example, or you want to improve speed. Well, take any lick from a solo, take any scale or whatever it is, and just play it. And there's probably going to be opportunities to improve by using that focus rotation concept. Or even fretboard visualization. Literally take anything, take any scale sequence you're practicing, and there's ways to sequence it up and down the fretboard to learn the fretboard better, to apply it to different scales. And the very question, like, what are the best exercises, is often a troubling one. It tells me that I'm going to need to teach that person a lot about what practicing really is.
Yeah, I think they're looking for a shortcut here, Mike. Because I get asked the same questions too. Like, what's the best technique for X? I want to do that. What's the best exercise for this? And I think what they're really asking is, how can I cheat at this? How can I get away from doing the real work, the real concentration, the real focus, the real practice? And can you give me some super magical fairy dust little exercise that if I change nothing about what I do, if I change nothing about how I think, nothing about how I'm concentrating or not concentrating, the lick itself is going to magically make my picking better. It's going to magically make my phrasing better. It's going to magically make the timing better, because this special magical exercise is going to do all the work for me. It's going to do all the heavy lifting, and I can just play and practice like I always do. I'm only half paying attention. I'm not really focused. I'm not really concentrating. I'm not really aware, but the lick is going to do all the work. And I think sometimes they're maybe unintentionally or unconsciously, they're asking for the magic pill that solves the problems because they don't want to like sit there and concentrate and do the fundamentals of concentrating on what they're doing and paying attention. And that is the thing that they often need to do to improve at everything and anything they're trying to, learn and master. I think it's a point that gets lost on a lot of people, which is what leads them to, what's the one big thing I can do in order to achieve X? What's the one special exercise? What's the one special practice routine that's going to solve the problems for me where I don't have to do any work? It's like, do you have a lottery? I want to be wealthy. Can you give me the winning lottery ticket? It's like, well, let's start by getting a job.
Right, right. And one thing that I sometimes, something you mentioned, Tom, has the idea of finding things boring, like the fundamentals or learning how to do focus rotation. One trick, if you will, that I have for that is I call this context expanding variations, where you can take any exercise you want, say a scale sequence, and instead of just playing it over and over for 20 minutes that you may have to practice, you can make little changes to how you are playing it. It can be as simple as switching from the bridge pickup to the neck pickup or vice versa. And you will discover that, oh, my pick attack isn't as strong as I thought it was. And that realization, or that's just one example of a realization you might have. Or it could be, the notes aren't in time, or there's string noise that it didn't hear before. Any realization like that, first of all, it resets your concentration. So practicing feels a little bit more new in a sense. And it also makes it very hard to get bored because you always have something new to pay attention to. It can also be as simple as moving the scale sequence from the major scale to the harmonic minor scale. Same sequencing pattern, but in a different scale. There's now going to be an extra fretting hand challenge, probably because of that awkward stretch in harmonic minor. You can move things up and down to the highest frets of the guitar, or the lowest frets of the guitar. You can play a 16th note pattern as triplets. Actually, funny, I recently taught a class where I had people play, Tom has the 1, 2, 3, 4 exercise that we typically think is like boring and mindless and all that. I actually had people do it for an hour because I found ways to make it challenging. And to me, it was really fun because you can take a boring 16th note pattern and play it as triplets. And all of a sudden you have to think a lot because the accents are now in completely different places. And I also found that people, when they play the 1, 2, 3, 4 stuff, they play it, they don't actually play it chromatically because there's a whole step. If you start on the 5th fret on every string, there's a whole step there. To really play it chromatically, you got to do a whole lot more position shifting. So if you do that, and then you combine that with playing it as triplets, even though it's 4 notes on every string, you have to slow things way down, and it's impossible to do it mindlessly. And one of the ways I teach people to sort of love mindful practicing, as it were, is by getting them to do things where it's impossible to play too fast and it's impossible to play mindlessly, because I give you a specific task to do and it's black and white. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. And in the process, you discover, wow, this is what practicing really feels like. It's actually mental work, which the kind of work that makes you better. And it doesn't really feel like work as you're doing it. But so that's just something else that I find very helpful.
Yeah, good stuff. And one of the things that I do or do myself, and I encourage my students to do, is to try to connect emotionally to what you're practicing. So if you're practicing something and it's just an exercise and it just seems kind of boring, it's monotonous, you're going through it over and over and over again. Well, my first question would be, why are you doing it 500 times in a row? Well, why are you doing that? If you're playing the same lick 500 times in a row, something's probably wrong with how you're practicing. Okay. So that's a separate conversation. But the thing is that when I'm practicing something, I'm always trying to change the phrasing. I'm always trying to make it a little bit more expressive than the time before, even if it's just a technical exercise where I'm trying to improve the synchronization of the hands or improve the fretting hand or something like that. It's technical minded. I still make it enjoyable for myself, and I encourage other people to do by adding in phrasing elements, even if they're not normally there within that exercise or lick or technique, because it just makes things more fun to play. Now, I'm not suggesting that we distract ourselves from doing the work that needs to be done and just goof off and not pay attention. I don't mean that. I mean to take the item, the lick, the phrase, the technique, and get more out. Imagine that it's actually in a song. Would you play it mechanically like a robot, or would you try and make this sound cool? Would you try to squeeze whatever feeling you can out of it? It's when you try to do that even with technical exercises. Everything is more fun, at least for me, and I think for most people, it's more fun because there's something expressive or emotional there that isn't naturally or inherently there in the exercise itself. So we have to insert fun by making it a little bit more expressive and imagining we're really playing this for real. It makes things more interesting. And then the type of practice which some people would perceive as being monotonous and boring isn't monotonous or boring anymore. And the other thing is that if when practice gets boring, it's because you're not concentrating. Instead, practice should be mentally fatiguing because if after an hour of practice, if your brain isn't like ready for a rest, not because it's bored, but because it's been working, it's been concentrating, that means you weren't really practicing. You were just kind of going through the motions and so on. So when I'm practicing something, my brain is like ready for a break. It's like, I don't know, it feels like I just read a book for an hour and I had to do a lot of concentrating on what I was reading and absorb it all. And now I'm ready to do something else, go outside or do something else. If I'm practicing something and it's just, I'm bored because it's mindless, that's the clue that I wasn't really concentrating at all. And if my brain isn't actively engaged, I just wasted the hour. I didn't get any better in that hour because you get better here, not here.
Right. Exactly. And I love what you said about connecting emotionally to what you're playing. And I find that this is especially lacking in guitar players who practice a lot of technique exercises or speed stuff. They want to build their speed, because what you said, Tom, has applies exactly perfectly to even like say a major root position arpeggio that you're playing up and down. You can play it up and down and focus on connecting emotionally to the fact that even when you're playing it slowly at like half the speed of Jason Becker or whatever, the notes still sound awesome. Like the notes still sound clean. They're in time, and you could put it on a record at that speed and it will still sound good. I'm finding that a lot of people who come to me like, hey, how do I speed this up? And they play it for me and it's sloppy as heck. And I'm like, well, how happy are you with what you just played, even though it's not, forget the speeds, let's put that aside for now. How does it sound in the absence of speeds? Everything else good about it. They're like, no, or I have no idea what you're even talking about, Mike. So I have to like explain to them.
It's like, why would we want to speed up that?
Yeah.
It's like we're driving, you get a car and you're driving down a crappy car and you say, let's make that crappy car go faster. It's so rusted out. You can see the road as you're driving by. My first car was like that. Why would we want to make that go faster? Okay, so we can get into an accident and kill ourselves. Let's make it sound better, smoother, nicer. Then let's make that faster. I think that's where you were going with that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And so actually, interesting side note, my first goal is just to have people find the top speed where they can achieve that, where the notes are clean, the notes where you feel relaxed, where you feel super confident that you could play at that speed every time, or 9 times out of 10, as you teach, Tom Hess. And once you find that speed, then all the ways to make something faster are going to actually help you. But most people haven't found that. They just try to play at the fastest speed where their hands can, the fastest speed they can possibly wiggle their hands with. And because the notes are horrible, they sound horrible, they feel tense, it's inconsistent, it's sloppy, everything, it doesn't work. So I keep talking about speed, but again, this is just because of my background isn't helping people with a lot of that. So my brain, that's where my brain is wired, but it applies to everything. If you want to think about phrasing or improvising a solo, that just becomes even more relevant. How to connect emotionally to how you do vibrato on one note, because Tom Hess, you and I, when we do the live events, when we train people to do phrasing, we have them practice the same 3 notes for an hour and make it sound awesome. And most people can't do that for 2 minutes without getting bored until we come up to them and be like, well, why don't you try also this and this and this and this variation? And all of a sudden an hour went by and they're like, holy crap, it's crazy how you actually can make the same 3 notes sound expressive for an hour and have fun the whole time you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Because if someone can't make 3 notes sound good, they're never going to make 30 notes sound good, or
Right.
300 or 3,000. So, adding more notes isn't going to improve. That might entertain us for a little bit, but if we can't make 3 notes sound good, 30 notes are going to sound worse every single time. Doesn't matter what those 30 notes are, they're not going to get better. So, yeah, that's a good point there. Uh, that you mentioned. Okay, so I wanted to maybe talk about um, maybe a general overview about how different practice approaches maybe should be used to achieve different objectives that someone might have. So, and before we get into that, I want to preface this by saying that although it is true that there is more than one right way to practice, when people hear that, often people on the internet, they'll say, well, there's no one right way to do something. That might be true, but the statement is incomplete. And what people do is they hear that or they think that, and then they assume that this means that all ways of doing something are equally good or equally as effective at any given time, which of course is not only false, but it's actually laughable. I mean, it's ridiculous when someone says there's not only one right way to do something, and then they interpret that to mean that anything goes, any way is just as effective as any other way, and it doesn't really matter. Just grab your guitar and play. I mean, that is like one of the dumbest things I ever hear. But you hear it a lot. You see people write that a lot online. You see people say that a lot. You see some people teaching that, and I was just blown away. Like, people pay you to tell them that?
Right. Yeah. So I completely agree that people do say this a lot. And I think it boils down to our tendency and our desire to oversimplify things. And as you said, Tom, has to look for shortcuts. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, to be fair. I mean, I like shortcuts as much as anybody. But you need to know when a shortcut is applicable, or when you need to just do a little bit of thinking. And it all boils down to
Yeah.
the first thing.
When the shortcut is actually shorter, or
Yeah.
when it's just going to take you longer because it doesn't work. Yeah.
Right. Right. And it all boils down to the idea of what problem are you solving, or what skill you're developing, and what are the exact problems that you have that are causing you to struggle. Because a lot of times people misdiagnose the problems they have, and they try to treat symptoms instead of root causes. So again, to use speed as the example, because it's so easy for me to talk about that stuff. Like, somebody says, I can't play fast. That's not a problem. That's not a cause of the problem. That's the symptom that you're perceiving that's causing you to become frustrated enough to go on a forum and ask about that, or pay for lessons or whatever. But the reasons why you might struggle to play fast could be 100 different things. Like, maybe you're not practicing. Period. Maybe that's one. Maybe your picking technique is all wrong. Maybe you're using a super thin pick, so you need just as simple as getting a pick that doesn't flex when you play. Will make your synchronization better. Will help you use more of the speed you already have. Maybe you are too tense. Maybe there is too much string noise going on. Maybe your mind isn't able to think. Maybe you're playing. You're moving your hands at speeds that are faster than your brain can do the focus rotation stuff, the analysis that we were talking about. Your brain's ability to do that is very slow. Let's say it's eighth notes at 100, but you're trying to play 16th notes at 140. There's no way you're going to be able to fix anything or clean anything up. So just those things I just quickly rattled off. Any of those, or some combination of them, is going to require a different set of practice methods in order to fix. And then there could be somebody who already has a pretty good, let's say, base of technique, and they're pretty relaxed when they're playing at slow to moderate speeds, and they need to actually push themselves. So to give a specific example, again, as it relates to speed, oftentimes I see this all the time, people arguing about this dichotomy of practicing Do you like start slow and gradually increase speed in small increments, or do you jump to some speed you can't currently play and push yourself using speed bursts and that kind of a thing? And people just go back and forth on this. And again, it depends on where the person is who hears that advice. And for a lot of people, to be fair, they are practicing too fast, and they need to find the top speed of where the playing is completely flawless, where in the absence of speed, everything else is basically perfect. They got to start there. The pushing yourself and using speed bursts and that sort of a thing is a little bit more advanced technique that requires a better foundation and a better ear, not like being able to hear a major third from a minor third ear, but ear of being able to tell when something is clean, when the pick attack is perfect, when the notes are in time, that kind of an ear. That person would benefit from pushing themselves and using speed bursts and methods like that much more than somebody who is still learning, the best way to hold the pick so it doesn't wobble in their grip, or somebody who is still learning how to hear when the notes are in time or when they're not. So that's just one example.
Yeah, that's really great stuff and you're absolutely right that there are different practice techniques or practice routines or practice approaches that are intended to achieve different things, to solve different problems, to help you advance in certain areas. But there are often prerequisites to some of that stuff. And you just mentioned one with the speed bursts. If you don't have a good awareness yet of what the flaws are and where they are, and then have them corrected, what use is going faster going to really do for that when all those mistakes just are played at a faster speed and they're getting further ingrained? So for some people, depending upon where they're at and what they're trying to do and what we're trying to solve, the speed burst thing makes sense for them for where they're at right now with that particular set of techniques. For others, it's not going to be the right way unless some of this other stuff, foundational stuff, gets straightened out. Same thing with should I start really slow, play with the metronome all the time and gradually build up the speed, or should I put the metronome aside, not use it, and have all this big space in between each note? It's something I know you talk about quite a bit. Well, it depends. It depends on where you're at, what you're trying to achieve, what current challenges you have. And it's just like a doctor who has different treatments or different medicines he could prescribe. A medicine could be a really good medicine as a cancer treatment, but might not be very good for your liver or your heart or something else. So we have to match the prescription to the diagnosis. It can't. There are some things that are universal, but some things, it depends on where you're at and what you're trying to accomplish and where you're trying to go. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, sometimes you mentioned earlier that sometimes people they self-diagnose and they think these are my problems, and they may not be problems at all. They may be symptoms, or some of those things might be problems. They might be legitimate things that they've correctly identified, but they've got the order all wrong. Like what if they say, well, I can't synchronize my two hands. Okay, you might be right. Maybe your two-hand synchronization is not good. But if the picking technique that you're using is highly inefficient, what good is it going to do to synchronize this to that when this is probably, you're going to have to change this anyway in order to expand your potential? So why would you want to tie these two things together when you're going to have to change this stuff in the picking hand? And once you make those changes, the hands have to then learn how to resync, because it won't feel the same anymore when the hands are in sync with one technique versus when you change the technique totally. That feeling, which is how you synchronize the two hands, is mainly by feel. That feeling will be off because you've changed the technique in one hand or the other. So sometimes, very often, the order matters a lot. And when people try and figure it out themselves, or they listen to general advice, whatever, from whoever on the internet or whatever, It doesn't mean that the advice is bad. I mean, there's a lot of bad advice on the internet, but it's not all bad. There's some good people saying some good things. There are some, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing for you in this right moment to solve the specific issues that you have. And that's where the disconnect is, especially when people are trying to kind of figure it out on their own. They're diagnosing everything. Now that next they have to try to determine who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't know what they're talking about. And even when you narrow it down to, okay, I think these people kind of know what they're talking about, which piece of advice applies to me for where I am right now with the issues I have and where I'm trying to go. If that piece is missing, we're still kind of guessing about they're basically guessing what they should be doing, in what order, how, why, and to solve what problem. When that disconnect is there, progress is going to be slower, it's going to take longer, and it's going to be more frustrating. So now when I was learning to play, I didn't know the things that I'm saying now. So I was the same way. I would take a little piece of information from that guy. I would learn a little bit from this teacher. I would read a little bit about this somewhere, and I try and put it all together. And I got some improvement in some areas, but other areas just didn't really advance because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So can you relate to that and see with people that you teach and coach?
Oh yeah, all the time. I get people asking me questions about, other teachers online. This guy said this. What do I think about, that advice? Sometimes I flat out disagree. Sometimes I say, well, it applies in general. It can apply to a certain type of person, like the speed burst thing, for example, because I hear people asking me about that a lot. It applies to a certain type of student, but it doesn't apply to you specifically. To you, we need to do something else. And something, Tom Hess, you mentioned about getting the order right, and the fact that there's more than one right way to treat the root cause of a problem. One thing I do a lot with students and with myself when practicing is, I mentioned these problem-solving techniques. I often use them all together, not all together, but I use a bunch of them together in a single practice session. So it's not like, going back to speed, for example, the idea of starting slowly and gradually increasing speed versus pushing yourself to play a little bit outside your comfort zone. It's not like, okay, you have to do this one for the next even month or the next week. So oftentimes you can combine them in a single practice session in the same 10, 15 minutes. Let's say you have an issue with your pick. You're moving the pick like this with the thumb and index finger, and I point that out that this is wrong, and you want to pick, more from the wrist. I get you to practice it slowly, if you will, but then after 2 minutes of that, I say, okay, now turn the metronome on to 100 BPM and do quarter notes. See if you can hold it together under the stress of the notes having to now be in time versus doing it completely free time. See if you can do that now with the new motion. I watch him and I say, okay, good, you're doing it. Now we'll go to the next level. So we've combined the slow practice with pushing yourself a little bit, even though it's not like I'm not telling you to play 1,000 notes a minute all of a sudden before you're ready. I'm pushing you a little bit outside of your comfort zone, whatever that is. And oftentimes people actually misunderstand what that is when they hear somebody like Sean Lane, who was famous for popularizing this advice of starting to play slow sorry, not slow, but pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. People think you have to play at like Sean Lane speed, set the metronome to like 600 and play 16th note triplets or something crazy like that, where you just have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, which may be way, 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 way slower, but you can still use the technique without having to necessarily push yourself to play at Sean Lane speeds or George Bella's speeds or whatever. So there's a lot of ways this can be misunderstood.
Yeah, good stuff here. Let's take a question here. I wonder if this is I'm asking for a friend kind of question. I'm asking for a friend. No, this is probably a serious question. Question is, how would you then teach a teenager who wants to shred but can't focus on it for more than a few seconds or just plain doesn't listen? further engraving terrible technique into their playing, asking for a friend. I'm being funny. So any thoughts on that, Mike?
Sure. Well, if somebody just plain doesn't listen, you can't teach everybody. That's all I'm going to say about that. But if somebody can't focus for more than a few seconds, uh, an easy way to work around that is to get people to do what I call those not focus rotation, but context expanding variations, where they're still playing the same lick, but they're playing it in different ways that resets their concentration in a variety of ways every few seconds if necessary. You can tell somebody to pick softly, then you can tell somebody to pick more aggressively while keeping the fretting hand more relaxed. You can have them focus on just one element of the focus rotation circle, like say tension, for 5 seconds. Then after 5 seconds, focus on string noise. Then after 5 seconds, maybe 5 seconds is an exaggeration, maybe 10 seconds or 30 seconds, focus on fretting hand thumb position. And this way, if you change the focus enough, it becomes impossible to tune out, because you literally, not enough time goes by for you to possibly get bored. And also, if you are teaching somebody and they're right in front of you, automatically there's a higher likelihood that they will pay attention at least for a few seconds. It's not like they're practicing on their own and they have to actually do it. They have to have the discipline to do it on their own. But if you are right there with them, you can get them to go through the process with the discipline of you being there to enforce that. And that's going to make it much more likely that they will then do it on their own at home too.
Yeah, I've got a couple of other alternative solutions. Everything you said, Mike, is great, and you can certainly do that, and that can certainly work. So the other two alternatives that come to my mind, the first one is buy a whip. Buy a whip. Just whip them into shape. I'm joking. Okay, but the second one is, if someone has, they are either unwilling or unable to concentrate for very long, if you really think they've got a problem, I don't know, ADD, ADHD, something like that. If you're dealing with someone like that, and not like someone just is refusing, they have the capacity to concentrate, but they're just unwilling. But if for people who really struggle with that, just use that part of their personality in your favor. So I drew you a little picture here. It looks like this. Okay. So every circle with an X in it is the specific thing you're trying to get them to do. Okay. So you're trying to get them to practice a particular technique or a lick or whatever, and you want them to concentrate or use a particular technique or focus their mind in a certain way. Have them do that for a couple of minutes. Then have them do something else. It could be, as Mike was saying, same idea, but have them focus on something different about that technique. Or it could be a totally separate item, unrelated to this. So they're doing this for a couple of minutes, then they're doing this something else for a couple of minutes. Then you come back to this again over here, and you have them do that again, same focus or a different focus, but the item in both cases is the same. Then you go to something else, then you just keep coming back to it. Okay, so now we have this interleaved, spaced practicing for that item, and you're not asking that person to concentrate for long periods of time on one thing, and maybe they get bored, maybe there's something wrong and they don't have the capacity to to really concentrate on one thing for a long time. Who knows what's going on there? But that's one way that you can deal with this issue without trying to say, no, here's my whip, you must practice this for an hour exactly this way. I don't care how bored you get. I don't care if you want to rip all your hair out. You have to do it. If you can't get them to concentrate, you can't just use it against them, or for them, I should say, and try this. Because by the end of an hour, if you got an hour-long class, they will have practiced this item many times the way you wanted them to practice, but they don't feel like they're going nuts by being forced to concentrate on something that's hard, challenging, boring. So that's one thing. Another thing you could do is, maybe when someone seems unable or unwilling to focus, maybe the thing we're asking them to do is just a little bit too hard mentally right now. It could be their personality. There could be a problem. ADD, ADHD, that's possible. Some people have that. Or it could be that for them, it just feels like the challenge is too big. Maybe we need to simplify it a little bit to make it easier for them to concentrate without getting overwhelmed. Or you could have the opposite problem. Maybe they're bored because it's just either it is too easy or they think it's too easy. They think they're beyond the thing that you're giving them to do. In that case, you might need to help them become more aware. Well, that's not quite right. That's not quite in time. That's not quite clean. Here's the difference between this and that. We want it to sound like this, and here's how we get there. So those type of things might help you teach a person like that. And I've had students like that. And Mike, I'm sure you've had a whole bunch of those type of people too. But that's one way to sort of deal with those people, because we want to help them too. We're not, as music teachers, we're not always going to be blessed with the people who you tell them to do X and they just do it. They just listen, they comply, they do it, they get better quickly, and you're happy, they're happy. That would be great if everybody was like that, but that's not how most people simply are. There's another question here from Alexis. Tom Hess mentioned that some items you can learn once and never really have to do it again. I think she might be referring to a class I taught maybe last week. Seems like a large-scale focus rotation, i.e. commitment of several weeks or months to one topic, is beneficial, true or false? Well, that's not exactly what I meant. I think I know where this question is coming from, because I mentioned this in a class to my students. And I think Alexis might be referring to my intent of that class. So let me just address this. And if you want to add anything to it, Mike, you can. I'm not suggesting that we take one item, one thing, we then just focus on it for weeks or months at a time and let everything else sit and wait while we just do that. That is not what I would have meant. Where I was going in that class was, we were talking about learning where things are on the guitar. If it's the class I'm thinking that Alexis is referring to. And instead of learning all the scale fingerings all the way up and down the guitar, let's learn one. And let's get that one so well under our fingers, we never have to think about it again. Then let's add the next one. So maybe the major scale, then you add the Dorian fingering above that. Now you've got two different scale positions that you can connect very easily, very fluently. You don't get stuck. You don't have to sit there and try and recall, okay, let's see, I'm on the third string. I want to shift up from this position to that position. Where's the note? Where do I go? All of that we want to eliminate. So I think it would be better in that case to just practice those two positions back and forth, in and out, than it would be to go and learn all 7 patterns, but then we can't really use them because it takes too long to recall the information when we need it, when we're jamming with friends or writing something or improvising or whatever. So in that case, yeah, just maybe focus on the 1 or 2 positions at a time, get good at it. But I don't mean don't practice, sweep picking or chords or improvising or other things. Maybe that's not what Alexis was implying, but I wanted to make sure that others reading the question might not interpret Alexis's question in that way. So I hope I answered. Alexis, if that was not clear, let me know in the chat. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there.
All right. Oh, I see she wrote also this. I didn't see this. To add to the question above, most people get impatient and want to move on to the next thing really fast. Asking for a friend. Yeah, it's true that some people do get impatient and want to move on to the next thing really fast. Well, that kind of can take us back to this, right? You can work on that for 2-3 minutes, do something else, but then come back to it. Do something else, come back to it. In fact, when you do it this way, this time in between practicing it here and practicing it here, where your mind is distracted with something else in the meantime, helps you to solidify the main thing we're practicing, because your brain has to go back and retrieve the information. This is a very good way to learn. Better than just sticking with this for an hour and doing nothing but that for an hour. Because then what happens is the brain just goes on autopilot and it stops concentrating. It stops thinking. And the hands just kind of do things and our mind wanders. We start thinking about what we're eating for dinner and something else. That you get better in your brain more than in your hands. The hands are going to follow what you're developing here for the most part.
It's funny, Tom Hess, what the diagram you drew is kind of how I used to practice when I was really, really young. And I thought that this was actually the wrong way to practice. And I felt like I needed to be more disciplined than just do one thing for an hour. What I later learned is that it's not actually in line with how our brain is designed to learn stuff. What you explained is actually 100% in line with how our brain's tendency is to be somewhat scatterbrained, as it were, and to favor this way of learning, which is why one of the reasons why it works so well.
Yeah, exactly. I think this one's for you, Mike. Bit weird to see Mike without a black shirt
and tie. Oh yeah, well I wear the black shirt at the event. I don't think I wear a tie, but got to have some variety.
Yeah, this is my tie right here. It's my tie. I don't have ties. It's attached to my face all the time. I can't get rid of the damn thing. It just won't leave. So, all right. Anything else, Mike, that you wanted to add before we wrap this up? And if anyone else has a question here, last minute here, now is the time to ask. But anything else in conclusion here, Mike, or about practical approach related to certain objectives, or?
Well, ultimately, everything boils down to what I said. The definition of practicing is solving problems and developing skills, and you need to have feedback to make sure to know if your practicing is being effective or not. And feedback doesn't just mean feedback from a teacher, even though that's ultimately a really, really good way to get feedback. You need to shrink the amount of time it takes for you to gauge the effectiveness of your practicing, which actually kind of takes me back to the focus rotation thing when I said you need to do it really, really fast. Like when you play a note, you got to know that everything about that note is perfect. This is an example of what I mean, getting feedback, except in this case, it's on a very micro level and happens really fast. But you need to also feel that when you're practicing whatever the thing is, that you are that you are actually moving forward and getting better at that thing. So as you are learning the idea of practicing, seek to get that feedback for yourself, either whether it is by getting feedback from a teacher or just making a study of effective practice mechanics and effective practice habits and skills. All of that's going to help you get that feedback, which ultimately will shrink the time it takes to become good. So,
yeah, good stuff. There's another question here I skipped over, not intentionally. I didn't see it. And I want to make sure that we address it. So worked on 3-string sweeping with 2-way pick slanting. The term slanting is problematic. I think what he means is tilting the pick. So angle is this way in relation to the strings. Tilt is this way. Okay. Some people call it slanting, but tilt is a much better term because it better describes what's happening. You're tilting it forward towards the floor or back towards your face. I know other people use the slant term. So anyway, it says, shall I develop the same for 2-string, 2 notes per string? Will I lose control? So assuming that I've understood the question, and if I've misunderstood it, let me know in the chat, Patriot Indian. I think he means slants. So like you're sweep picking, it looks like this, where the tilt of the pick is changing when you're ascending versus descending. That's my understanding of the question. So, Mike, do you want to address that? I have some comments on that.
Yes, I think I know what you will say, and in a lot of ways, we agree on the big idea. That is, you don't want to have the hand changing the tilt, especially not very frequently, because it creates all kinds of inconsistency issues in the technique and possibility for noise to enter your playing. So I don't like the idea of excessive forearm rotation when you are picking and when you're sweeping, especially on a 2-string sweep, because then it has to happen very frequently. What I do though for sweeping, and that's a bit of a ninja hack that it's probably a little bit too good to share for free, but what the hell, is I loosen the grip on my pick when I sweep, which allows me to get the best of both worlds. It allows me to have the advantage of the pick doing to have the tilt when I'm ascending, So this position is more advantageous for downstrokes. But without having to turn my hand, I just loosen the grip of my pick so that as it goes through the strings, it gets that tilt this way. And then when I descend, it does a little bit this way. Of course, I'm exaggerating.
Well, Mike did say, Mike, you're frozen for me. I thought we were getting too far into the ninja stuff, and you just like left. Your camera was for me. Your camera was frozen. It's like, that really was too good to give for free. So Mike's out of here.
Okay, should I start over?
No, what we saw was, or what I heard was, is that you say you're loosening the grip a little bit, so the change of tilt happens as a result of loosening up on the grip.
Right.
The pick is allowed to flex a little bit,
right,
when sweeping, but you're not doing that. You're not
exactly
changing your position to make that happen.
Exactly right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I have were you finished on that, Mike?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I have a different take on that. And it doesn't mean that, what Mike said is wrong or anything, but it is going to be a little contradictory to what Mike said. And you can try it either way. My philosophy is that the tilt of the pick should never change. Only exception I can think of is during a pinch harmonic. Of course, you have to change the tilt in order to get the thumb to make the pinch harmonic. So when I'm sweeping, the tilt doesn't change whether I'm ascending or descending. It's consistent. And the reason why it's consistent and why I recommend for students to keep it consistent is that when the pick is tilting, the pick's relation to the strings in space changes. So if it's this way or this way, now your brain has a little bit.
Sorry to cut you off. Maybe you can make yourself big on the screen and me small because you're showing stuff.
Yeah. Okay, good call. Okay, so when you're sweeping or doing anything, when the tilt of the pick changes, where the pick is in space relative to the strings changes. So the pick is staying in contact with the strings, but your brain doesn't really know where the pick is. Your brain knows where this is. Okay, you feel this. The fingers gripping the pick. You know exactly, or you should know exactly where your hand is. Okay. So now if we put the pick in your hand, if the pick is consistent, doesn't matter if you pick everything this way or everything this way or everything this way. Okay. So I'm not saying don't tilt it this way, don't tilt it that way, keep it straight. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is no matter what you do, you want it to be consistent. Why consistent? So that you know exactly where this is right here in relation to the strings. It makes it easier to synchronize and keep synchronized the fretting hand with the picking hand. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't synchronize your two hands when you're doing this. It just means it's going to take a little longer and it's going to be a little harder. Okay? Because now your brain has to memorize where is my hand in relation to the strings when the pick is tilted this way. And when I come the other way, well, now my hand, this is in a totally different place in relation to the strings. And now I've got to memorize what that feels like for the synchronization. I'm not saying you got to memorize what it feels like for the picking hand. I'm saying you've got to memorize the synchronization, the feeling of this syncing up with this. And it's harder when this changes. It's not impossible. It can be done. People do it, but now it's going to require a little bit more effort. So for me, I don't want more effort. Okay. I want to be able to do it once and I want to be done. I don't want to have to, put in more effort to relearn that. Wouldn't take forever, but the effort would be more than zero. And I don't see much of a benefit. Okay. Now you guys can do whatever you want. Mike shared what he does. Okay. He loosens up on the grip and the pick naturally might tilt, but notice he's not doing this. So his fingers in space are consistent, just that the pick is not consistent. Okay. So whatever you guys want to do, you got a couple different, approaches, so you can do whatever you want. But that's my thought on that. So, all right. Very good. Thank you, Mike, for everything that you shared here today. Great stuff. Awesome stuff. Thanks for the great questions that we had here today. Take care, everybody. Oh, but by the way, you have something for these guys to get for free, do you not?
Yes, I do. It's a video masterclass on how to build speed without doing a whole bunch of boring, slow practice. It's a new take on how to get faster in not a lot of time. You don't need to practice for 8 hours a day. And if you find slow practicing to be kind of boring and you want to know how to do this idea of pushing yourself in a smart, intelligent way where it's not like ridiculous way that just ingrains your bad habits even more into your technique, this is where you can learn it. It's totally free. Check it out and enjoy.
Very good. And that costs like $1 million, right? People have to pay a lot of money for that.
It should cost a lot of money, but it's free.
It's free. Right. Awesome. Okay. And I also have something for you guys, and it is also free. Okay. This is total guitar playing tension control. All right. And this will help you to reduce the amount of tension that you have, that you're playing with when you play your guitar, because as the tension goes down and you can be more relaxed, it's easier for you to play faster without having to add brute force effort in order to do that. So this is like a 90-minute, hour-long video. Okay, it was a free class. It's free to you. Okay, you can download it at this link that you see on the screen. It's also in the chat, tomhess.net/total-tension-control. And check it out. You'll need about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to watch it all. You don't have to watch it all at once, but this will help you a lot to be able to make things easier to play with less effort, and it increases your speed potential. All right. So, Mike, thanks again. And thank you to everybody who's hanging out here today. Take care, and we will see you guys next time.
Thanks, Tom Hess. Thanks, everyone. See ya.